on mindfulness. And can I sort of see who's heard of mindfulness or mindfulness meditation? Oh, right. Wonderful. Right. So if I had done that, though, probably 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure I would see everyone's hands go up. So we have Jon Kabat-Zinn to thank for really bringing this into our curriculum in medical schools and our knowledge in academics. So I do a lot of research in this area, and I'd like to start off by just sort of explaining what mindfulness is and how I'm using it. So Jon Kabat-Zinn's terms here are that it means paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. That's typically how it's defined when we use it in mindfulness-based stress reduction and other strategies that are sort of developed from that. Interestingly, there's sort of a debate about taxonomy and how you call these different things, but it's sort of generally in an academic setting considered to be a form of meditation. So meditation is sort of the broader view, and meditation can take a lot of forms. Yoga, different kinds of practices, even in Christian religions, other religions are very meditative and can be very mindful. I even had one of my patients convince me that golf is a meditation. He convinced me. I believe him. Not all golfers, maybe, but... And it's a little bit of the background of, so mindfulness has become popular through Jon Kabat-Zinn, but it's existed for a long time in multiple cultures and multiple religions. Where we think of it from Jon Kabat-Zinn, because this is sort of where he pulled it from, is from some of this Buddhism found in Southeast Asia, and this particular kind, Theravada. And the terminology even comes from a translation of those words of establishing mindfulness. The important thing with respect to this conversation here is what practicing mindfulness in its various forms, meditation, other kinds of contemplative practices, what it can do for you. So what we've heard about are things sort of spontaneously happening, or happening by accident, or having to take a horrible tragedy to happen. And what I'm focusing on is, can we access that on purpose and draw the goodness from that, the benefits from that, intentionally? And wow, just let that sink in. If we could have 1 million Jeff Olsons without the tragedy, without the pain, if people could wake up every morning and know this, know that we are more than just what our bodies are, and if everyone could join in that, our world would be tremendously different. And I would vote that it would be tremendously better. So that's where my research is going. I didn't get there immediately. I didn't wake up out of high school and say, this is it. But slowly over time, this has occurred to me and happened. I started with studying how it arrived here and looking at the strategies that were brought out by Jon Kabat-Zinn, by others. You see here pictures of Jack Kornfield. Many of you may know or have read his books. Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein. So I learned from the research that was already being done, some before my time, some while I was coming up through graduate school, and some of which I'm now participating myself in by conducting it. As you can see, mindfulness research has increased dramatically. I mean, almost exponentially since they began sort of documenting it back in the 80s, and you can see the rise. So this is good news. It also demonstrates the interest and the acceptance that we're beginning to see, sort of like a groundswell. And I was talking with someone in the restroom about this groundswell. It's things like this, people like you coming out and talking about it, that help keep that movement going. So thank you. As you may know, there are three sort of core skills that we talk about when we're practicing specifically mindfulness, but this could be said of many of the meditative sort of components that we learn. Concentration, this ability to focus, stabilize your attention, sensory clarity, sort of keeping track of components of your sensory experience moment by moment in the present moment, and this wonderful equanimity, this sort of just ability to be with, this gentle curiosity that they sometimes speak about when they're walking you through a meditation, this openness and willingness. And in my pursuit of learning and studying, I found what has come to be fairly well known is these sorts of mindfulness practices are associated with amazing, healthy, wonderful things. So enhanced self-awareness, increased attentional control, reductions in your stress, greater self-regulation of your emotions, and improved physical and health and immunity. And these are becoming, like I said, fairly well established, and we have people in the audience I've spoken to who are conducting and continuing this research in very well established academic universities and medical centers around the country. And we're finding more and more that both in mental health, which is listed here, and also in physical health, these practices can have an enormous impact. So these are sort of a list of some of the components that have been impacted by mindfulness research. So John Kabat-Zinn started out by working with chronic pain patients where nothing else could be done for them, and helped them. Depression is another one that's been used and studied quite well. Emotional lability or dysregulation. So these are often folks that I work a lot with, people with personality disorders where their emotional regulation is really difficult. They often have come from a very traumatic developmental history. They don't want to be this way, but they are just very emotionally out of control. And we have found that this form of sort of therapy helps them tremendously, this mindfulness component. It's been used extensively with addiction, both smoking, alcohol abuse or a dependence, and they're expanding it every day to try and work with other addictions. And, of course, anxiety and stress. It really does help psychologically reduce those components. That's a big part of it. More recently, it's been used in children with attention disorders. As you can imagine, a big component is augmenting that ability to focus attention. So I myself have done research in these areas, specifically alcohol dependence and the personality disorders. And I find it to be incredibly gratifying and fulfilling to see people literally change their lives in positive ways through the use of these strategies. I've also begun to do more research looking at the physical components. So this is sort of the gold standard, as you can imagine, in medical school. I work in a medical school, so they say that's great and everything, that people are feeling better, blah, blah, blah. But what about the physical changes? And so we are stepping up and looking at that. I was sharing with some of you that I recently received a large amount of funding to do research on developing a mindfulness-based intervention for people with lupus. This is extremely important to me because a lot of the mindfulness research that we've done so far has been, as you might expect, on white upper middle class people. Many people with lupus are not like that. They are usually African American females, underrepresented. There have been no significant developments in the treatment of lupus in over 2 decades because no one will fund it. We've finally got some funding for this, so I'm very excited about this. We're also looking at, we're going to be looking at improving their quality of life, reducing their symptoms, but we're going to be looking at the big one, changing their markers for lupus, changing the physiology. This is a little bit of a sidestep, but I'm really excited about it because it's very meaningful and powerful if we can find some significant improvement there. So these are the things that I'm excited about, but there's something I'm even more excited about, if you can believe it, and I get really excited, so watch out. And that is the fact that not so much these, I'm going to skip through these. These are great, and it does change our neuroplasticity. When we're looking at physiologically, brains change. We see this. We see this on functional fMRIs, which are measures of your brain in action. We see that people who meditate have changes there for the positive. They're able to change their brain in positive ways. And as was said earlier by you, Jeff, you know, the things you think, they do happen. And we see this here, that this is powerful. It does change actually not just things like how you feel, but literally physical changes. We also see changes in prosocial behavior. And this is a big one that we haven't talked about. It's been alluded to. But there is our own mindfulness, our own awareness of our consciousness, and then there is the group. And I pointed out the feeling of the group earlier because I think that is a component we also need to acknowledge, that we may all be part of this larger consciousness that has an impact as well. In our lupus intervention, for example, we're doing something which seems probably like very common sense to every single one of you, but believe it or not, it's not been done in mindfulness research. We're bringing in the lupus patients' loved ones, the people they live with, who care for them, and we're going to train them as well so that they can practice together. And you know what? We think that will make a really big difference. So we're very excited about that because we know it does affect people in a group, in a pack. And we know that it also impacts prosocial behavior. It helps balance what's called our relaxation response. We respond to stress more effectively. And our regulation, so what's called our resilience zone, physiologically, our mindfulness helps deepen this resilience zone, sort of widen that so we can accommodate more both psychological and physical stress. It's been expanded to be used in the society. You know you're big time when Tim Ryan, the congressman from Ohio, promotes us meditation on the Capitol Hill. This is what I wanted to make sure I got to. So this is what I'm really excited about. The research I've spoken about already that I've been doing, I'm going to continue to do, looking at this impact of consciousness, expanding mindfulness practices on our psychological well-being and our health is wonderful, and it's important, and I'll continue to do that. The one thing that is also not studied is this larger area of other effects that the mindfulness has on people. And these are these sort of other things, the extraordinary experiences that for most researchers, they, first of all, never ask about. We don't ask people these sorts of questions when we do research with them. And if people spontaneously mention them, we ignore it. So there are a few of us now who are beginning to wake up to this and say we need to collect this information. If you go back to some of the original sort of literature in this, grounded in the spiritual sort of context in which it started, these are to be expected. And in some cases, this would be the whole point of your mindfulness meditation. So why are we ignoring it? So these are the sort of things that we might want to promote. These destruction of the defiling impulses, the nastiness of humanity, psychokinesis, clairaudience. Clairaudience, for those who don't know, is where you pick up, you hear things. And this is a wake-up call for some of you. You might already have this. If you've ever heard maybe your voice called and there was no one there, or you are laying in bed at night and you hear what sounds like a radio playing somewhere, if that's clairaudience, that's us tuning into something beyond here. Telepathic knowledge, retrocognitive knowledge, and knowing something that is from the past, and clairvoyance, of course, knowing something in the future. So the way we're going to be looking at this is, first of all, it's also, I wanted to not skip over this, it's interesting that although this is not, like I said, we typically don't study this, there's a very popular therapy that's done now called dialectical behavior therapy. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. Psychologists have heard of it a lot. It's done quite a bit for people with personality disorders or emotional dysregulation problems. And one of the strategies that's used, a predominant strategy, is mindfulness. So it's one of these mindfulness-based interventions that I was talking about. And they use mindfulness in this. I do this practice a lot with patients to achieve this place called the wise mind. And in the development of this therapy, it was developed by a wonderful woman named Marcia Linehan, who's out in Seattle. She talks about the wise mind being this balance between the logical, rational mind and the emotional mind, sort of that Venn diagram where they overlay. That's the meditative place, that mindfulness place that we're trying to get to that I've described before. What's also interesting, though, is that she sort of, as a side note, explained that if people can achieve that wise mind, number one, they use all their other skills more effectively, interpersonal communication, regulating their mood, but also they seem to have this unusual increase in intuition and some other things. She sort of talks about unusual other things. So they're exactly these things that she's talking about, that she sort of stumbled upon and didn't expect. So what we found then, I collaborated with a wonderful woman, Cassie Veaton, and we've developed some projects, but in doing so, she shared with me what they had already collected there at their facility out in Petaluma. And she said that they did primarily retrospective data, all retrospective, in fact, and looking at the relationship between meditation and psi performance. And there seemed to be a significant relationship there of people meditating and having reports when you ask, again, of this increased psi performance on tasks that they actually did. Also, they got this large number of meditators, retrospectively asked them about these sort of experiences, and 50% said that they many times or almost always had these extraordinary experiences when they were meditating. And over 50% of them endorsed clairvoyance or telepathy. 60% endorsed that these were very meaningful or important. So not only are they having them, that they're profound. They mean something significant to them in a positive way. These, I don't know if you realize it, these are huge numbers. And maybe you're sitting there calmly because you go, yes, it seems obvious. To outside scientists, these are mind-boggling. I'm glad they're not mind-boggling to you. So what we are doing, for my part in DOPS, is really trying to move forward to the next steps of really looking at these sort of practices and using them on purpose and intentionally to see if we can generate these sort of qualities. So also looking at psi abilities in very scientific ways, as my colleagues do, looking at some more prospective research. Can we plan this ahead of time instead of asking about it in the past, and see if we can create this and expand the methods for achievement of this mindfulness state and accessing these abilities, and exploring the impact of that. If we can increase this in a group of people, what does that do to the community? What does that do to the individual? Can we take this to another level of not just sort of stumbling across it accidentally, but creating it intentionally? And it's impressive to think about what we could harness with these increasing abilities if we put our mind to it and do it intentionally. And I want to end with a beautiful picture of our home community. And thank you very much for listening to me as I stumbled through this and got very excited. I really appreciate it. And I will end with the words from Thomas Jefferson: "The glow of one warm thought is to me